Titus 2. The last couple of weeks, so we spent the first week talking about households, right? And family, how church is a household of households or a family of families. And that's why, as Paul in many epistles is getting things right in the church and getting things in order, he takes the time to make sure that people have their household in order. He's constantly talking to wives and husbands and children, because if you want a strong church, you got to have strong families. And you know, as people grow in the Lord, you're having to teach them to, live out every area of their life in a Christ-like way, which not everybody's in ministry. Not everybody's serving the church and a Bible scholar and things like that. But what most everybody is they fit into a certain category. Like most everybody, if you're younger, you're a son or daughter. If you're older, you're probably a husband or wife. If you're even older than that, right, you're older and you can help teach the younger husbands and wives. You might be a father or a mother. And so a lot of the teaching in the New Testament is in this context of household and family. And the same reason is also because we are God's household. The church is God's family. And so he teaches us and helps us to be good family members to one another. So last week we zeroed in and focused on the men. This week, as Paul continues on, we're going to zero in and focus on the women, because that's what he does. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to read through the section again, and then we'll zero in and talk to the women here today. So he says, you must say things that are consistent with sound teaching. Older men, you are to be level-headed, worthy of respect, sensible and sound in the faith, love, and endurance. In the same way, older women are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not addicted to much wine. They are to teach what is good, so that they may encourage young women to love their husbands and love their children, to be self-controlled, pure, homemakers, kind, submissive to their husbands, so that God's message will not be slandered. In the same way, encourage young men to be self-controlled in everything. Make yourself a good example with integrity and dignity in your teaching. Your message is to be sound beyond reproach, so that the opponents will be ashamed, having nothing bad to say about us. Slaves are to be submissive to their masters in everything, and to be well-pleasing and not talking back or stealing, but demonstrating utter faithfulness, so that they may adorn the teaching of God our Savior in everything. So as we zero in this week on the women, last week when we talked about the guys, we talked to the older men first. They had a certain ethic that they were striving towards. They had a certain way of living that was to model both the order and structure that God has and purpose that God has placed into all of creation, which works itself out in the family and society and the church. And they were to model that for the younger men, and then the younger men were to be able to look to the older men to learn from that, but they too were also given a charge to be self-controlled, right? And we talked about how it's kind of built up in young men to want to get into everything, want to do all the things, want to be building and productive and to go conquer the world, which is awesome, but along the way, those young men also still need to learn self-control, right? They've got to learn discipline. They've got to learn some wisdom so that they can pump the brakes when they need to, make good decisions instead of bad decisions. And it was the job of the older men within the congregation to set that example for them so that they had somebody to look towards and to learn from. And so we get the same thing. I call these the Titus 2 relationships in the church. We get the same thing that we see. This is the same process with older women and younger women, okay? Is that you have a duty and a responsibility as a woman in the church, if you're younger, to find some older women and learn from them. I mean, if you're older, hey, you find some younger women and help teach them. There's relational growth that happens in the church, in a good, healthy church, right? That you have to have intergenerational relationships so that you have examples to follow, as well as you're learning and growing in your own experience along the way, so that later you can be that example for someone else who's younger than you to help follow, right? This is also why we found it's very important and very good to just keep the church together. We enjoy a family integrated worship because we want our children and the younger people here to actually develop relationships with older people. I want my sons to have older men, that they're seeing how they worship and seeing how they live their life, watching me and them interact and have conversation. I want them to know what it's like as they grow older and have to step into a more adulthood role, right? I want my daughters to be able to look up to older women within the faith and see how they raised their kids and helped in their family and loved their husbands and how they worshiped and how they learn and how they grow, right? We want our kids to have hands-on experience with that, not for it to be a foreign thing to them, or to feel like there's this hard divide that the parents are over here, the adults do the adult thing and the kids do the kid thing. No, we want this to be blended together, that it's a learning process for everybody, right? We're building those relationships so that they're valuable over the long term. So, here's what he says: in the same way, just like the older men are supposed to be good examples for the younger women, the younger men, in the same way, older women, first is their example. They are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not addicted to much wine. These are the first three things that you see. And we talked about this with the men. The things that were brought forth when it came to the men seemed to be things that men struggle with. And so Paul was having to teach them, like, the world as men lives this certain way, you need to be different. And I think it's the same thing with the women here when we look at this, okay? It's very easy for women to not be reverent in their behavior. See feminism, example number one in our culture, right? What that has created. And I'm talking about I'm not saying like, any kind of rights for women is bad or anything like that. I'm saying feminism to the point where it's your rights, your ways above anything else, right? What that's morphed into over the years is just seeking pleasure as much as you can. You can do anything you want because you're a woman. You can dress any way you want. You can live any way you want. You can do all the things, right? And so we see that unchecked, women tend to go the route of not being reverent in their behavior. But for a godly woman, that's the number one thing you want to make sure is in place and in order, right? What do you think of when you think of the word reverent? Anybody have something that you think of?
Still and all. I don't know.
Okay. How about reverent in behavior? What do you think of when you think of the word reverent? Where do we typically use that word reverent?
Revere.
Which means? If you revere something, what's that?
Hold in high esteem.
You hold in high esteem, right? Okay. So to revere something means you hold it in high esteem. You treat it seriously, right? You think of it typically in regards to like worship and things like that, right? Like you revere God, so you come to Him with a certain posture, with a certain, I keep thinking of the word seriousness, but I don't just want to say like serious. I want to say what's that?
Gravitas.
There's a weight to it, right? There's a gravitas. There's a respect. That was the word I was looking for. Respect, right? So women are to be respectable in their behavior. They should be reverent in their behavior. The opposite to this would be what our culture calls loose, right? I hate to be that way, but like that would literally be the opposite, right? So instead of just being like what you would think of in your mind as a loose woman, you would be someone that is put together, someone that has respect and dignity, somebody that has a place for seriousness in their life. Not just always serious, and that's not the kind of serious I'm talking about. I'm just talking about you're known as a person that is reverent in your behavior. You're calculated. You're not just doing whatever you feel like. You're doing the right things, right? Paul talks about the behavior of women adorning, them being adorned by their good works. That's what I think of when it comes to women. Women, very often, there's something built into you that, beauty is a defining mark of a woman, okay? That's just a reality. That's something baked into creation, that beauty is a defining mark of a woman. And Paul says, don't let your beauty just be on the outside. Because if all that you are defined by as a woman is the beauty that you have on the outside, you're missing the point. He says, let your beauty be the adorning of good works that you have. He says your beauty should be the inside beauty that comes out. Yes, it's good, and yes, it's okay to want and to be beautiful on the outside. Nobody's saying to diminish that. That's God-given. You're a woman for those reasons. Women are marked by beauty. But don't just let it be on the outside. Be beautiful on the inside. Be beautiful in your behavior. Be beautiful in your actions, being known for doing a lot of good work and serving and loving and caring and doing all the things that God has for you. Does that make sense? That's being reverent in your behavior. It says not slanderers. So think about a slanderer is somebody who's talking lies or saying things about somebody else behind their back or maybe out in front, but you're constantly, another thing I think of, and in Timothy it talks about this for women, it says not being gossipers. When you think of gossip, do you typically think of men or women? Let's just be honest. Women. It is a tendency because you're more relational, because you're more wired to talk a lot, the temptation is there to talk about people you shouldn't be, or to others about things you shouldn't, or to say that, hey, I heard this about this person. I heard this about that person. Or, I know this about this person, or whatever. And so there's a temptation towards slandering others or gossiping about others that women have that needs to be tempered. And so Paul says, older women, be reverent in your behavior and don't be slanderers. Watch your mouth. Watch what you're talking about. It's good that you're relational. It's good you like to talk and you build your relationships with each other and with others through sharing your feelings and experiences. But just be careful what you're sharing. Be careful who and what you're talking about.
I think that slander, in this sense, often has to do with specifically character defamation.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great point. Just be careful of that stuff. That's bad for guys too. But I think there's something as we're working through this, like we talked to the guys already, now we're talking to the women. Paul and the Holy Spirit guided Paul to put down here, these are the things you need to watch out for. If the shoe fits, put it on, right? He says, not addicted to much wine. I think this is interesting in our culture too, because we've had this kind of resurgence. Maybe it's not a resurgence, but there's a thing now. I don't know what it's called, but it's like mommy wine culture, right? I mean, there's literally shirts and memes like wine first, or man, I just had such a rough day with my kids. I need my hour at the night to unwind with wine. You don't go to Jesus, you go to the bottle. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Listen, wine, God gave wine in the scriptures. It says for a glad heart and for certain purposes, for celebration and stuff like that. But there's also a pitfall and a trap when it comes to wine and alcohol. And some of that is going to that when you should be going to Jesus. You had a tough day with your family and your kids or your husband or your work or whatever it is. Do you resort to the wine bottle, or do you go take that anxiety to the Lord and you go to Him for peace? Can you get through a day and have some tough struggles and things like that and still be able to come to a place of peace because of your relationship with Jesus? Or do you need that extra thing that you're constantly and always going towards because that's actually, in essence, your God? And you just can't get through life, or you can't get through this circumstance without that substance. You don't want that. There's a context for that stuff. But if you give yourself more to that than you give yourself to Jesus, if that supplies you peace more than Jesus supplies you peace, if that brings you joy and gladness of heart more than Jesus brings you joy and gladness of heart, if you go to escape with that and not escape to Jesus, you may have a problem. That may need checked in your life. So women, you just got to watch out. Men too. Men go to the bottle just as much. They might go to a case of beer as opposed to a thing of wine, but we have to watch this, not to be addicted to much wine. Here's what you are to do now. They are to teach what is good so that they may encourage. And so there's a qualifier here. Teach what is good so what's the product of your teaching? So that you may encourage the young women to love their husbands, love their children, to be self-controlled, pure, homemakers, kind, submissive to their husbands, so that God's message will not be slandered. Women, the one thing, before I get into some of those things, the one thing I do want you to know is that your role and your value is so important because it is actually an area that the scriptures put an emphasis on, that when your conduct and your behavior tends to either glorify God or kind of diminish what people think about God. And you go, well, that's not fair. I mean, it happens that way for men too. When men don't lead and they don't play their role the right way too, that's obviously taking away and not glorifying God. But there is something special about a woman's attitude and her actions that those who are watching see and feel a certain way that it either enhances and glorifies God more, or it can diminish God's message. If you've got a lot of women that are running around, and let's just put this into context of if you got a bunch of loose, doing the opposite of what this says. If you got a bunch of loose women who are not reverent in their behavior, they're talking bad about a lot of people, and they're addicted to wine, God's message is slandered in that process. Right? So it's really important the way you live. Now, here's what we're striving towards. Here are the things that are good and valuable in God's sight when it comes to women. It says they are to encourage young women to love their husbands and love their children. Here's one thing. Maybe you've realized this in your life. It's not natural to know. There are natural parts, but in general, you have to learn how to properly love your husband and love and care for your children. You don't just usually by osmosis figure it out without bumps and bruises along the way, right? You can, but it's going to be a really hard process. If you have an older woman that you can go to and talk to, like, man, my husband's been doing this, and I'm doing this, and it just seems like we're in conflict all the time. That older woman, if she's been married for a handful of years and she's godly and has been grown in the Lord and has a good marriage, she's going to be able to go, oh dear, like, he thinks this way and you think this way. You guys are passing in the wind. Here's what you need to do. I've learned this over my 40 years in marriage, my 30 years of marriage, that if you do A, B, C, and D, that's going to bring you guys so much closer together. You guys are fighting over a bunch of things because you speak two different languages, because you think about two totally different things. You know what I mean? That older woman is going to be able to help you so much experientially to have a good marriage. Because she has walked through the minefield with her husband, more likely. She's probably learned from older people, right? This is where grandmas are so valuable, especially ones that have been married 40, 50 years. My grandparents were married, I think, almost 60 years before they passed away. You know how much you learn in 60 years about what's great, good for your marriage and for raising kids, and what works and what doesn't work, and how many times you did something and you thought it would work, but it didn't, and you just need to kind of get through a season or whatever it is. That experience is so valuable. So the main areas that we need to be growing in, and I would say that you need to seek out in your life, especially if you're in one of these seasons, if you're a younger woman or you've got young kids and you don't have anyone that's older that has been through the minefield, so to speak, you gotta seek out a relationship like that. And I know sometimes they're hard to find. Not everybody's open to having this kind of a relationship, and you may actually have to pursue it, right? You may have to go get it, but I think it's worth it. You may have to ask an older couple. If you have it in your family, great. You may need to go sit down and have a conversation with your grandparents sometime. Preferably if they're believers, that's going to help a little bit more because you're going to be in line with your outcomes and your goals. But even just sometimes general wisdom is good, right? Sometimes you might work with older men or women that you just need to go pick their brain. As long as there was, check the fruit on the tree. I always say check the fruit on the tree. If they had terrible marriages and terrible kids, and their kids are like, grown up and left the faith or whatever, that may not be the person you want to talk to. It could be. It may not be their fault. They may have done a lot of things right and some just went wayward. But I'm saying in general, find some fruit on the tree. The other thing is, if you have some experience, you've been married 15, 20 years, if you've got a healthy family, if your kids are growing up and they're learning from the Lord and being raised in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, it's your responsibility to find some younger women and help them because they don't know how to do it. This is the church. This is what I find really interesting, and I think it's something we need to always remember. Paul does not say, older women, your job is to, hear me out here. Paul doesn't say, older women, your job is to host a Bible study and teach the scripture to all the younger women. He says, no, you need to teach them how to love their husbands and their children. Does that mean the Bible's not important? No, the Bible's going to be the foundation for the principles that do that. But you normally don't need just more theology, especially if you plug into church. You're going to have a place where you're growing. You should be in the scriptures every day anyway, growing in your understanding of the scriptures. What you need and what you need to grow in is your practical understanding of how to live life. How to live life in light of Christ. How to love your husband the way you're called to. How to follow his leadership the way you're called to. How to grow as a mother the way you're called to. How to nurture and to discipline your children the way you're called to as a Christian. It's the practical stuff that makes our relationships within the body important. Sometimes we always just want to get together and go over Bible studies. Yes, we do need that, but you know what else you need? And this is for men too. We need to get together and say, hey, this is how you love your wife. Hey, this is how you set up a schedule so that you're productive and not just wasting a bunch of time. Hey, here's how you budget in light of Christ. Because if you're in debt and you're throwing your money away in a bunch of different places, you're not living a godly lifestyle that way, right? It's the practical matters within that matter within the body too. Because if you're just all theological, but you never learn how to apply things to your life's still going to be a wreck. And that's not a good testimony to Jesus. Does that make sense? Sorry, I kind of went off over that, but it's true. Like, this is stuff we need to think about because I think sometimes, everybody wants to get together and Bible study all the time. And look, I love the Bible. I'm Mr. Bible Study. Literally. You need that. But you also, and more so, need the practical knowledge too. Okay? That is influenced by the Bible, but has real life implication into what it means to live your life. It says they are to be self-controlled. Women, we've got to develop self-control. Look, that's important for women in particular because women tend to be a little more emotional, which is beautiful. It's good. It's your maternal instincts. It's how God wired you. But the reality is you do lose control a lot of your emotions and yourself. And so you got to learn to control that. Pure. A woman's purity matters. A man's purity matters too, but a woman's purity matters. Is she seeking a godly lifestyle? Is she living according to holiness and things that God says are good? Right? We could take this too far and you go like purity culture and everything and, and it's all the outward that we're talking about. You're not allowed to wear, think of the legalistics, right? Pure means you never wear, like as a woman, you can't wear pants. No, that's something, there are places in the church where that exists. You got to wear a dress and it's got to cover your ankles. You know what I mean? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a pure heart and a pure lifestyle that is pursuing Jesus and living godly and living in a way that honors Him in every area. Okay? Homemakers. The interesting thing that I looked at when I was diving into this, because I know this can be controversial in our culture today, but the reality is the understanding of the word of homemakers, and when you see this in Timothy as well, when it says that they are to be homemakers and have their selves focused on the house, right? There's two things to look at. Number one, the literal word of this has the idea that they're home-centric in the sense that their number one priority as woman and as mother or wife is that it's actually, the word here is the guard of the house. The household is your domain. And listen, this bears itself out in creation, that you would be home-centric in the sense that, listen, you're the one God gave the role and you're the only one. You are the maternal part of the equation. You're the one that brings life into this world. You're the one that has a special heart bent and desire towards your children and the beings that you create, to love them and care for them and serve them selflessly, right? Selflessly, not selfishly, selflessly. And so it makes sense that rooted into your goal and your design is going to be that as the Lord brings into your life a husband and children, that your focus would be to culture and to nurture that as your number one priority. In that, we do see that doesn't mean you can't do anything to contribute to the household. It doesn't mean that you can't and so much, unfortunately, gets brought back to money and things like that these days, that, women should be able to work and all that. Sure, that's fine. I mean, you look at the Proverbs 31 woman, and she's a very entrepreneurial, industrious woman, but all of her entrepreneurial and industrious works are with the goal of her household. Her household was first. Her household had the priority. Her children were the ones that she cared about and loved and served. And in the process, she was building that household. She was industrious in those ways. That was her outlet. I mean, Paul's so bold to say that childbearing actually saves the woman in Timothy. Why? And that doesn't mean if you can't physically have children, you're any less. It doesn't mean that if, there's a variety of outliers here that I don't have time to go over, but we could talk about, right? Just because we're talking about married couples doesn't mean you're less if you're single or anything like that. No, there's a place for all these stages of life and all these instances of life. There were very godly people that remained either celibate or they remained unmarried or they remained without children their whole entire life. Look, there's all those different scenarios. But the general understanding is that if God brings a husband into your life and if God brings children into your life, that's your biggest and first ministry. And that through serving them and loving them and caring for them the best you can, you are actually living a godliest lifestyle that you can. And so it's your goal to be as best as you can in that role that you can, right? And to serve your household any way that you can in that process. Okay? You're to be house-centric, homemakers, kind and submissive to their husbands so that God's message will not be slandered. Okay? And I always talk about that word submission. I'll end on this, that in our culture it's a bad word today, but it's not. Submission, you can break it down. Sub is to be under or a part of someone else's mission, right? And that is why God gives you a husband. That's the reality of it. You're to be in mission together. Right? You're to help. You were created as his helper and his helpmate, right? So you ought to, as a family, have a larger mission you guys are working towards. And your primary role as a woman is to be the helper, helping your husband accomplish the leadership and the mission that your family has. That's not a demeaning position, because guess what? God says he's supposed to love you and serve you and lead you as Christ leads the church. So he's got a pretty big mission that he's living up towards to as well, right? So you guys are supposed to be working together. You guys are supposed to be part of each other. Right? It's like we don't look as the church, we don't go, well, I'm not going to obey Jesus because I don't want to be in submission to him. No, that's goofy. We recognize Jesus is the one that is our leader. And so it's our job as the church to submit to his leadership and to carry out the mission he's given us. And it's the same thing. A rightly functioning family is oriented with Christ as the head, with a husband that has the authority and leadership of the family, who's following Christ, and then the wife is submitted to the husband and is moving in the same direction towards a greater mission altogether. And then they are nurturing and building up their children to follow along in those footsteps as well. That's the ideal family. That's what God has laid forth as what is appropriate and what makes the gospel message to those on the outside beautiful. When you look in and you see a beautiful family like that, yeah.
You brought up the Proverbs 31 woman, and I think it's easy nowadays to like read that and think like, oh, she sounds so busy. She sounds like so much stress on her shoulders. Is this like an unmeetable ideal? And one of the things that always stands out to me about that passage is in the midst of how busy she is, how entrepreneurial she is, one of the big emphasis I think that gives us is prevent is like, she's making sure she's aware of, she understands how everyone's doing in the household.
Yeah.
Like she makes it her business to know and to be aware of and maybe taking actions or nudging towards making sure everybody's okay in the midst of all the busy. Because in a married team with however many kids you have or whatever your mission is in life, even if there's no kids involved, you're going to be really busy.
Yeah.
As a team, and you're going to have to take care of each other.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to be taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And someone on the team needs to be especially good at being aware of how everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Or things can get out of whack really quickly.
That's really good. And in Timothy, when I was looking this up, and I'm glad you brought that up because, again, the word Paul uses, he takes two words and he smashes them together and kind of makes a new word, it seems like, because it's only used once in the scriptures. And it is house guarder. And the other way you could look at it is manager of the house. The woman tends to end up being the manager of the house. It's her main, because, and again, societally, but then also by design, the man was out doing and being productive on the outside, right? But then he would still come home and has responsibility, right? I hate that I always have to qualify this, but like, I'm not saying the guy goes out and checks out or no, both of you are bent towards these things and you've got to build your household. But there are roles that are put forth that seem to come out of creation that God has wired in that are a good fit for us in our design and how we're wired, right? And for the woman, managing the household is that. And guarding it. Think of those terms too, like guard and manage. That's a great role. Like that's a high calling.
And we should take our wives seriously.
Yeah.
Because they do get our attention when we throw it out.
100%.
We have to pay attention.
Yep.
And act on it. Build something with them that they can trust.
Yeah.
So that they're not looking at imbalances and uncertainties and just feeling like it's going to all fall apart.
That's good. That's good. Anything else? Yeah.
I also wanted to bring up, is there anything like the ethic that's put forth in Proverbs 31 that is in conflict or contrast with anything that's in the New Testament, right? Is what Paul's saying, hey, you can't be this, is he saying in any way that you can't be this woman that's laid out?
I don't think so. No. But you do have to understand it in context because, Proverbs 31 I have seen in places, particularly that are second, third wave feminism. You can do all the things, accomplish all the things, particularly at the expense of your family. See, that's the difference. And they use Proverbs 31 to justify that because she's going out and she's making cloths and selling them in the marketplace. And see, you can own your own business. You could go sell things and you could go do that. But what you have to realize is like that was her taking care of her family. You know what I mean? That was her being actually home-centric in the process. And the reason she did those things, first she made them for her own family, and then she would then take them to the marketplace and stuff like that. So there's context that really helps clear some of that stuff up. It's not just a blanket statement that you can just go, pursue all the things. Particularly, again, we're talking about at the expense of your family. Today, unfortunately, that's what is told to a lot of women, right? That you go and you do things for you at the expense of a family. Women are not getting married, they're pursuing careers, and they're not having families, which that is bad. Don't hear me wrong here, but there's a sense in which that's long-term, that's bad for a society. Not that women get educated. No, that's good. You should be educated. Not that you go and you have skills that you can offer in the marketplace or anything. No, those are all good things. But if you are doing it to the expense of a family, when that is your, a heart and desire and something you want to do or would do in the future, you can just see the fruit of that today. Like, our culture is dying. Because, like, women, like, and again, men can help in this process too. I'm not just pointing the finger at women, but our culture is dying because no one is home raising the next generation and helping the next generation. Both men and women have neglected their duties. And it's literally killing our culture. It's also being outbred. People are having less and less children. That's not for, like, human flourishing. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing, long term, should the Lord tarry. We're going to be in big problem as a society.
I think a lot of the effect of feminism and, like, my criticism of it is not so much that we should encourage women because they're strong and they can do lots of good things. Because we know they're strong and they can do lots of good things, and they should. The criticism is, a lot of what feminism seems to be about is, we're going to hate men, we're going to push them out of women's lives, and women are going to have their own mission.
Yeah. And what we need to capture is the biblical understanding that men and women need each other, and they were made for each other. And then they were made to make a family, and that they were made to then work at that family for a greater mission to bless this world and to raise godly offspring that grow up and bless the world with their own families in general that are a blessing to the world, and we leave the world a better place, right? So as we do that, though, we've got to go, men, this is what you need to be doing. Here's practically how you live your life in light of Jesus. Women, this is the things that you need to be doing. These are the things that if you live practically in light of Jesus, it's going to accomplish those ends. Children, you need to obey your parents and listen to them. And you need to learn from older people. Okay? All right? And then it gets in order. All right. Anything else? I know, I feel like these last couple weeks I keep going, man, sorry guys, I went a little long. Went a little long again today. But gracious Lord, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you that we know it is a lamp for our feet and a light for our path, and that it's for our good. The way you've created us, the roles that you've given us, the instructions you've given us are for our blessing and for the flourishing of your image bearers to take dominion of this earth and to make it a better place, continually infecting it with your ways and your truth and your laws and your love. Help us to do that and start with our young people. May they have godly examples to follow. And may we also continue to be growing and learning ourselves to be better husbands, better wives, better fathers, better mothers, better friends, and to just impart that wisdom and knowledge to the next generations, to continually just grow people in Christ-likeness, in love, in faith, and purity. In Jesus' name, amen.